Thank you so much for coming out at 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I'm Caroline Bix, and I'm so thrilled to be a part of this group today, a really, really exciting group of speakers here. We're going to try really hard to keep it to the spirit of the 7-minute stretch, which is a challenge. But first, I want to thank Zarmeek Muqtadiri and Jordan Shin for organizing this. And to Jeff Behrens, of course, and Lori Rudder for putting all of this together. All right, so I have the honor of getting us started today. I teach and I write about Shakespeare for a living. But my next project, my next book, is something a little unconventional. It's something I never would have imagined I would have been writing 5 years ago. It's called Shakespeare Not Stirred, and it's a humorous cocktail book, and it's co-written with my friend and colleague, Michelle Ephraim, and it's where we riff on Shakespeare's characters and their predicaments, and then create really fun cocktails for them, and use it as a way to think through our own, everyday problems. So we have things like Screw Your Courage to the Sticking Place, Man Time. That's where we have drinks like the Henry VIII Whiskey Smash and Clobber with the little decorative skull sticks. We have categories like Get Thee to a Winery, Girls' Night Out. Ophelia's Life Preserver is our cocktail there. Now, I know what you're thinking. Booze? Professors? This is why we have to get rid of tenure. But hear me out, because the story I want to tell you today, it's not about how I use my Shakespeare cred to sell a cocktail book. It's really about the stories that we're told to live by and to listen for, and all of the other stories that we never hear and don't tell because of conventional wisdom. Now, when you go into academia, you're given a lot of unspoken rules. Like, number one, you never admit you don't know anything. Number two, you never let your personal beliefs cloud your scholarship. And number three, never let your personal life interfere with your career, especially if you have kids. In fact, you know what? Don't have kids. Or better yet, if you have to, wait until tenure, which was the advice I got when I went on the academic job market. Now, in some ways, this probably isn't that different from other careers. But what makes being a professor different is that every day we're interacting with young people, really adolescents, and they're watching us. And whether or not they recognize it or we want it, they're looking to us as a way of modeling who you could be and how to think at a time when they're thinking about who they could be and what the possibilities might look like. Now, when I was an undergrad here, I experienced my professors as these giant disembodied heads. I mean, they're very brilliant brains, but I had no idea if they had friends or illnesses or families or passions outside of the classroom, except for Robert Coles. I'll hold off on doing my imitation of him. I only have 7 minutes. And this was especially true in the literature classroom. You were never supposed to bring your personal beliefs to what you were studying because you had to be completely objective. You were meant to appreciate great works, but never bring your own personal beliefs into an interpretation. And of course, the same was true for how I was taught to be an academic. Never talk about your personal life. When I went on the academic job market in 1997, my husband and I had just gotten married. We were both humanities PhDs. We were both looking for tenure-track jobs. You can imagine how this is going to turn out. And we decided we were going to do the conventionally wise thing. We were going to live apart if we had to. We'd commute between cities, states, if we had to. And after my first job interview, word got back to me through my professor that someone on the hiring committee had asked, "Is the husband going to be a problem?" Now, I have no idea how this person knew I was married or that my husband was an academic, but I had to negotiate the question at my flyback. I knew I had to do that. So I did the conventionally wise thing. I asked about real estate, and I put a lot of interest into putting down roots. I talked about my husband like he was incredibly flexible and would follow me anywhere, like he was this really well-tamed pet. I could put in a crate when I went off to teach. anyone's shed or anything like that. So we actually did end up commuting for 4 years between Boston and Columbus, Ohio, and somehow we managed to have a kid, and we managed to get 2 tenure-track jobs in the same city eventually, and we had 2 book contracts and 2 teaching loads and 2 kids, and we had a jumbo mortgage, and then one of us didn't get tenure. So all that conventional wisdom, it just turned out to be useless. But then something kind of great happened, because when there's no more conventional wisdom for your situation, you're free to reinvent yourself. And that's exactly what my husband did. And watching him do that, it really inspired me to stop listening to what it was I was supposed to be doing as an academic. And to stop talking about the separation between my personal life and my work, and to start having fun and telling stories about the way the two informed each other all the time, in even entertaining ways. So I started blogging with my friend Michelle at Everyday Shakespeare, back when blogging was actually interesting and hip. And we started riffing about how our lives intersected with Shakespeare and vice versa. We used our actual names, we weren't anonymous. And I decided to tell my story in a way that was pretty public. So I took that behind closed doors question, is the husband going to be a problem? Which at the time felt so shaming and so limiting. And I brought it out into the open. I didn't change the words, but I did change the perspective. And I told a story that was always there. And this is the point for me, what I want to say today. Is it really any shift, any meaningful shift in how we interpret something, whether it's a cultural commonplace or a political injustice or a Shakespeare play? It's coming from the same source. It's coming from a critic with an unconventional perspective. And those shifts are never going to happen if we don't bring our personal life and our experiences to our work and to our world. It isn't a problem. It's an opportunity. And it's an obligation. This is a question I get all the time from my undergrads when I give them an assignment. What are you looking for? Or what do you want? What do I want? I want you to find a question that excites you, that actually matters to you, that only you would think to ask. I would also like it if you didn't write the possessive of its as IT''S. Please don't start your essay since the beginning of time. And don't send me emails addressed, hey, prof, or hey. But besides that, I really don't want anything else. I really don't want anything specifically in terms of the questions that I want my students to be asking about Shakespeare or about anything else for that matter. So I try to model a way of thinking for them in the classroom that's showing them how I came to the questions that inspire me, that matter to me, that sustain me, which means, yeah, I'm talking about my life outside the classroom. So this brings me back to Ophelia. Now, the conventional way that we're taught to think about Ophelia is that she's vulnerable, she's a victim, she's driven to insanity and suicide by her husband, sorry, not her husband, her boyfriend's, crappy treatment of her, and her father's death. And we've gotten so used to this story, this conventional wisdom about her, that we stopped listening to her about 400 years ago. But if you really pay attention to what she's talking about and what she's saying, she's a critic, she's an observer. She's a historian. She's a storyteller. She has a great speech that gets cut in most film versions where she talks about Hamlet's noble mind being overthrown. She is memorializing the history that's been lost and forgotten. Oh me, she says, to see what I have seen and see what I see. Now, most modern editions of this play, of Hamlet, they keep the stage direction that says enter Ophelia playing on a lute, and this is Helen Mirren in 1970 playing on a lute, but you probably don't know this image of Ophelia because, again, this is not what most people want to see or hear about her. Because really we prefer to think of our Ophelia as kind of crazy. kind of sexy maybe, or just dead and quiet. But not really as artful and productive and as a storyteller. And that's what brings me to my current research now on early modern girls, taking another look at how they're being represented in all the kinds of ways that they're productive and the way their brains are actually seen to be very active. Now, it's no surprise that I'm coming to these questions now that I live with a 14-year-old girl. There's a great synchronicity in my days while I'm reading these representations of girls and thinking about it, and then listening to my daughter playing a song on the guitar, or writing something, or doing a hilarious imitation of her growth ed instructor. Yeah, my personal life obviously impacts the questions that I'm bringing to things and the things that I'm listening for now. I think I'm hearing things better now. And it was always true that these two things were informing each other. It's just that now I'm recognizing it, and now I'm celebrating the creative potential it opens up in more ways than I could have imagined. So here's to you, Ophelia. Cheers, and thank you. Okay, our next speaker.
Thank you.
Is Kevin Volp. I'm going to find your intro now.
Oh, okay.
All right. So, Kevin wanted me to say the following to introduce him. Inspired by Bio 21 Professor Dick Taylor and HMS Professor Dick Pappenheimer, Kevin decided to become a scientist. His friends and faculty advisors through Harvard AEO convinced him to focus on public health. And through it all, individual patients have helped him to recognize the many challenges in living a healthy lifestyle. Lucky to have had a chance to work on these issues since 2001 as a faculty member with wonderful colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania. Kevin Volp.
Thanks. Well, thank you. After hundreds and hundreds of hours sitting in these seats as a student, it's a real privilege to be able to share some ideas with you guys. So the basic problem we work on is this issue of individual behavior. There's a lot of people who have very high rates of unhealthy behavior really struggle to change it despite their best intentions. So we know there's a lot of chronic diseases that are very common in the US population. Smoking still the leading cause of preventative mortality, obesity, hypertension. All of these are heavily influenced by behavior choices people make. And one of the most fascinating statistics in medicine is that even when people have a life-threatening event like a heart attack, only about half of them actually take their cardiovascular medicines in the year following a heart attack. And this has remained a vexing problem for clinicians and public health professionals for many, many years. Because of that, you see statistics like the pie chart on the right, where there's a lot of different reasons for premature mortality. Many of these are not really alterable using current technology. Behavior choices are a big part of the pie. And it's a big part of the pie both because it's a big challenge, but of course it's also a big opportunity. So in essence, what we're trying to achieve here is not really what you see on the left. It's really more what you see on the right. So the staircase on the right is a gleaming staircase from the Comcast headquarters in Philadelphia. Unfortunately, most workplaces do not have a beautiful staircase like this that practically begs you to walk up it. But think about this as a metaphor for what we're trying to achieve, a smoother glide path to choosing the healthier alternative. So in essence, those of us who work in social science related to behavior have been on this interesting journey where I think increasingly it's been recognized information alone is not really sufficient to change people's behavior. And a lot of, for example, smokers know that smoking causes lung cancer and heart disease, and that's pretty well documented. As a result, a lot of employers have been moving towards using economic incentives of various kinds. About 85% of employers in the US today, large employers, use incentives for health behavior of one kind or another. The main limitation to those approaches is they tend to be couched in the rubric of standard economics. And I don't know how much of economics you guys remember, but for those of you who took Econ 10, I think we were really taught about standard economics and rational utility maximization. And a lot of what's happened in behavioral economics has really post-dated that in terms of really understanding how we as humans behave. So people focus much more on the present than the future. They're very susceptible to framing effects. They're very influenced by how they feel about a decision as opposed to any deliberative cognitive process. Very influenced by the actions of those around them, how choices are presented to them, how many choices are presented to them, what the defaults are. So all of this provides, I think, a much more rich context for how decisions are made, and we have to consider that as we think about how to change people's health behavior. We can't just give them economic incentives and assume that the size of the reward is all that matters. It's really much more complicated than that. So the basic challenge we face, if you think about this from a healthcare delivery standpoint, is even if I'm a patient who has a lot of chronic diseases, let's say I go to the doctor 20 times a year, each of those visits might be 7 minutes long, 10 minutes long of FaceTime with the doctor, so that's 2 to 3 hours. And you have 5,000 plus waking hours where your doctor doesn't know what you're doing and doesn't really have any tools to influence what's happening. There's an enormous opportunity here because you look at the proliferation of wireless devices and some of our increased understanding of human behavior, and suddenly it opens up all sorts of new possibilities for how we might manage people's chronic diseases. And a lot of this really might not involve coming into the doctor's office at all. So the way we've thought about this at Penn is basically take a series of different types of wireless devices. And as you guys know, there's lots of them out there, and the technology is amazing, and it keeps getting better. A lot of these devices are able to passively upload information without a lot of extra effort by the participant. These can be scales, glucometers, blood pressure cuffs, pedometers, medication adherence monitors, so on and so forth. These devices transmit information to a server. The server can have a rules engine in which you give people feedback. And you can give feedback to the individual patient, to a friend or family member they designate, to a group of peers, to peer mentors, selectively with an exception handling process, to clinicians in the practice who now know, all the patients who aren't coming in to see me, here are the ones who are struggling with their diabetes. Here's the person, here are the 5 people I need to call today because they're really falling through the cracks. And so what we do is we test all these different ways of giving people feedback, either feedback to the patient, to the friend or family member, to this peer group, to their providers, and a lot of times we use some sort of financial incentive. Sometimes we tie that to benefit design, sometimes we don't. But there's a lot of opportunity here to really try to shift the way care is provided from just paying the bills when people get sick to really thinking about how do we use the insurance incentive design system, the money in the system, to better try to keep people healthy. So we've done this in a lot of different contexts. This is an example of some work we've done with weight loss, where this was some work we did among veterans, where you're able to really achieve pretty significant weight loss in people through direct incentives that give people feedback and that leverage some of the psychological principles of decision making. We're also able to do things like tie people together. This is an example of another program that we developed where we tie people who used to have poor control of a disease like diabetes, but now have good control. So they've achieved some mastery of the disease, and we pair them with people who still have poor control and just allow the social altruism to work. So it's a model that's used by Alcoholics Anonymous and Weight Watchers and other contexts. But you can see here this achieves pretty good improvement of people's diabetes control. So this is an example of where we see things are going. There's a convergence of what's happening in terms of the federal interest in health financing, concerns about the federal budget, how do we make better use of healthcare dollars. So the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation has been endowed with $10 billion of your money to try to improve how the health system works and improve healthcare quality, at the same time trying to make better use of money. This is an example of one of the studies they funded. We take patients who have had heart attacks, we randomize them to either usual benefits or getting a series of interventions where they get wireless pill bottles, they designate a friend or family member who gets notified automatically if they miss 2 doses of any of their medicines. They also get daily lottery type incentives to keep them engaged. And then we also have clinical social workers, nurses who call people if they miss 4 or more doses of their medicines. So we're doing this now in partnership with 5 different insurers around the country, and pretty good results. As I mentioned, the data earlier show that people who have had heart attacks only take their medicines about half the time. We're at about 85% in patients in 39 states. One thing I wanted to mention is that this isn't just about giving people a technology. If you target these interventions at high-risk people, which you almost have to do from a cost-effectiveness standpoint, the problem is that a lot of people have poorly controlled chronic disease because they don't take their medicine, because they smoke, et cetera. And so if you just give them the wireless devices, they're not going to necessarily use them at very high rates. And that's what we see here. The line on the bottom shows if you just give people devices, about half of them stop using it within 3 months. You need some sort of engagement incentive to keep them going. Lots of different initiatives in the field by our groups and others trying to figure out how do we use data to try to build chronic disease management, try to make this work better for the whole system. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So Christine Birkenstock-Yardley is our next speaker, and Christine was a social studies concentrator at Harvard with a focus on international relations. In the fall of 1989, she set off for study in Belgium, and that year she shifted her focus to education and fueled her desire to see the world. About 10 years ago, she read the book Monkey Dancing, about a dad who travels the world with his 2 kids, and for years she dreamed of taking her kids around the world.
I'm here today to talk to you about our trip, which is a little bit different than the trip that most people take. So in 2012, I traveled around the world, traveled and volunteered with my 4 kids. We traveled more than 57,000 miles to 16 countries on 6 continents for 187 days. So I set up the trip so that we would spend about a month on each continent, and I picked a country on each continent, and we volunteered there for 3 weeks, and then we had time between each place to volunteer. We each took 1 suitcase and 1 backpack, so here we are outside of the Roman Colosseum with all our stuff, and that was just after we walked about a mile to get to the metro so we could get to the train. So I went on my own. I am married to my husband, Kevin, whom I met here freshman week, and we dated all through college. So pluses and minuses of going on my own. Thanks, yeah. That's 29 years we've been together. So obvious, the pluses and minuses, the disadvantages are fairly obvious. I was a single mom wandering the globe with 4 kids in tow. So you know how to do all the planning, washing the clothes, buying food, you know, making sure everybody ate, homeschooling, and also we were volunteering and then just trying to deal with all the bickering and dealing with that. So that was, yeah, I learned how to seat them often in the car. In the car it was okay, but on the plane we had certain seat setups to keep certain ones separated. So I also had some, made some mistakes and had some scary moments. When I was in South Africa, I ran out of gas. And I had my cell phone and called my husband because I had nobody else to call. And he was in the US and yelled at me for being so stupid and running out of gas. So why would you do that? I wasn't really planning on it. So after about 45 minutes of sitting there trying to figure out what to do, there was a knock on the window, and this man in a uniform is there, and I look over, and he has a truck, and it has a label on it, AA, and I was like, oh, must be like AAA, and he says, are you out of gas? Can I help you? And I just had to give him money, and he went off and got gas. I mean, we were so fortunate throughout the trip. The advantages, there were some things that I didn't even think about because the original plan was for all 6 of us to go together. Kevin came each month and he would bring us some supplies and treats from home. And then, as he says, his main job was to carry our souvenirs home. And so there we are after my friend Randall said, hey, what about one of those wooden giraffes? In South Africa, we bought the 5-foot wooden giraffe and we made Kevin carry that home. So he also stayed home, took care of the house and the cats, and he continued to work and make money, which was very important. But probably the most special benefit of me going on my own was that the kids and I made a team of 5, and which wouldn't have happened if we had 2 parents traveling, both of us going. So they had to step up more and pitch in. They navigated for me when I was driving, and they had to look out for each other. So finding places to volunteer, everybody always asks me, you know, how did you do it? Did you use a service? Did you go with a group? But I did everything on my own. Most of the places I found were through friends and their connections. For the other places, I used the internet, just searched on the internet to find places to volunteer and just kept emailing and searching till I found a place. And you don't have to use a service. You don't have to pay money to go volunteer. There's a lot of those volunteer vacations. I did pay at one place, and that was the Monkey Refuge in Argentina. That was it, and it went to help take care of the animals. It was a donation. So this picture here shows my good friend, Randall Spalding Fetcher, my friend from Harvard Band in class of '89. So we stayed with his family in Cape Town, and he put us in touch with a friend of a friend who found us a place to volunteer. So I want to focus now on the benefits of volunteer travel, because it's not something people always think about when they go traveling with their kids. And there are so many benefits. It gave us an instant into the community. We were immediately accepted and became part of the community. So here it shows my two boys having lunch at a friend's house in Vietnam. We learned more about the culture. We got to see schools all over the world. And this is in Argentina, decorating a Christmas tree with our new friends there. My job for 6 months was really, teaching my kids. I homeschooled them, but every day I got to teach them the value of relationships and helping other people. And everywhere we went, we made a positive impact. All of us would say probably the very, very best part of the trip was meeting people and making friends all around the world. And we made connections that continue to last today. In fact, just a month or so ago, one of our friends a new friend from Germany, he came and visited us, and we got to sort of pay it forward. So we got to the kids actually instantly bonded with all the other kids. So I just have some pictures from each country. In Vietnam, we volunteered at an orphanage, and we worked mostly in the baby and toddler room. In Australia, we volunteered at an elementary school, and we helped with reading and math, and we taught kids about the U.S. In South Africa, we volunteered in a preschool and an after-school program, and we taught kids letters and games. In Italy, we volunteered at an after-school program, and we did crafts, and we Skyped with classes in the U.S. In Costa Rica, we taught kids songs and games in English. In Argentina, for a few days, we did the same. And then finally, we volunteered at a monkey refuge in Argentina. And that was, they had about 200 monkeys, and they had about 40 dogs, a couple mountain lions, llamas, chicks, they had all sorts of animals. And this was probably the hardest and one of the best experiences we had. Volunteer travel also allowed us to participate in out-of-the-ordinary experiences. For me, the best experience of the whole trip was the weekend we spent in Australia, camping on an island on the Great Barrier Reef, snorkeling and watching whales breaching. And we got to do that because a teacher at the school invited us, and they brought all the gear and everything so we could camp there and have that experience. So it was also travel, so I just wanted to share. It was really hard. I took about 20,000 pictures on the trip, had to narrow it down to about 40 that I have here. So amazing sights and experiences. Here we are at Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Australia, we just had so many incredible experiences. South Africa, one of the best was we drove ourselves on safari through Kruger National Park. In Europe, we visited 9 cities, and so here's pictures from 6 of them. Costa Rica, we used to live there, so we got to have time to hang out on the beach and relax a little bit, see animals, and visit friends. And then we also went to Nicaragua, climbed an octovolcano and sledded down that. Argentina, we rented a camper and drove over 2,000 miles to Patagonia to see the largest penguin colony in South America with 500,000 penguins. All right, and on the trip, we got to have lots of family time. So we had, we were together 24/7. We had, there was no soccer practice. There were no piano, guitar, trombone lessons, no school board meetings, no basketball tournaments for the whole weekend. We had 187 days of quality time. And I'm hoping that that's going to be, that my kids will have a special bond for the rest of their lives. We learned perseverance, flexibility, patience, gratitude. The bottom right picture shows that's the room that we stayed in Argentina with our rickety beds. All 5 of us were often shared the same room, so I'm hoping that's going to prepare them for college dorm life. But we had these rickety beds. My husband said it looked like, it was in a jail cell. But the roof leaked. We had no electricity, and we had to bring the water up from the river for the toilet. I washed clothes in the river there. So my kids definitely learned to appreciate their life and privileges they have in the U.S. So when I was preparing this, I was debating, should I say this was a life-changing experience? It's easy to say that. A lot of people have. So I thought about that for a while. And I think it definitely was. Some of it, I think, is going to come later. My oldest daughter, who's now 17, says that, it was definitely, she would say, earth-shattering for her. And, she said when she came back, people looked at her differently. She looked at herself differently. I asked my 14-year-old, was it earth-shattering? He said, no, I would say it was earth-traveling. So I'm hoping that for the younger, that they're still a little bit too young and that the epiphany will come later. For me, one of the best experiences, one of the best things that I took away from the trip was that I really formed a special bond with my oldest daughter, because she would be the one that would help the most and the one kind of that I would lean on. If I had to go do something, she would watch the kids, so she really had to be responsible. And we really have a special bond because of that trip. And one of the books we read during the trip was Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, and he says at the end, truly, for less than that, would you not make the journey around the world? So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So our next speaker is Jeremy Shapiro. Jeremy asked me to say that he parlayed a computer science undergrad concentration into becoming a fellow in foreign policy studies at the Brookings Institute and was on the State Department policy planning staff from 2009 to 2013. Jeremy Shapiro.
Thanks. It's really great to be here. It's great especially to be in this room where I excuse me, took some of the best naps of my life. I'm hoping to be able to give you the same experience, so please feel free. My proposition today is that your government is a genius. This is, to put it mildly, I think not the conventional wisdom, which is a sort of different way of saying I don't really believe it, but I'm going to defend it in a sort of ass-backwards kind of way. Because I think that despite all of the processes and the sort of the bad vibes you hear coming out of the government, the result of a lot of these processes is a sort of genius. We can discuss. I only have 7 minutes to discuss that, and so we'll, I think, reserve for the 8th minute whether it's an evil genius or not. But I think you'll see when I'm done that there is a certain kind of genius there. I do have to caveat this by saying that I only worked in the State Department. I only really worked on foreign policy, so I'm only talking about that. And so this is a bit of a rampant generalization, but if I didn't have those, I wouldn't really be able to say anything. So let's go with it. I came to the State Department in 2009. And those sort of halcyon days of yore when everybody believed that President Obama's eloquence could make the oceans recede. I came, luckily, with a very cynical, shriveled heart, so my disappointment was somewhat limited. But despite that, I was still really quite shocked by a lot of the things that I saw, particularly in the way that decisions were made. Decisions seemed to sort of spring from the head of Minerva with no ownership to them. You couldn't even really tell where they came from. And this was true of small decisions and large. The decision about whether to increase embassy security, which seemed small at the time. The decision to whether or not we should launch airstrikes against Syria. All of these things seem to have this emergent quality, and this was horrifying and at the same time quite fascinating to me. it was a little bit like a car wreck. You couldn't take your eyes away from it, despite how tragic it was. I think that the most horrifying aspect really was that the government was really spectacularly resistant to new ideas. Expert consensus on issues like Civil War, termination, things that I had been sort of schooled on at the Brookings Institution and thought there was some knowledge about, really didn't matter. And trying to change the way that the government thought about a problem was like trying to swim in Jell-O, which is hard. I didn't really, I guess, in the end, try to change them that much, but I did try to understand. And I think in the process of trying to understand, I got a sense of some of the government's peculiar and particular wisdom. I think the starting point for this understanding is that the government is not a person, the Citizens United case notwithstanding. It is a vast constellation of people and institutions. And what that means is that government, it seems sort of obvious to say this, but if you read the newspaper on a daily basis, you'll see that people are demanding that the government should know this fact, should think this way, should learn this lesson. But the government doesn't work that way because it's not a person. Government knowledge is not really learned or deduced as we do it. It's a bureaucratic and political compromise between conflicting goals. So the result is that the government doesn't and shouldn't think in clear and consistent ways, at least according to our understanding. I thought there were sort of 4 prototypical manifestations of this phenomenon that I saw. One, as I said, is the government lacks consistency, and this is where the real genius comes in. F. Scott Fitzgerald said that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Government is fantastic at this. So at the same time, the government can truly believe, that it is the principal defender of internet freedom in the world and the principal user of the internet for espionage. Doesn't bother it at all. The second manifestation is that the government is incredibly resistant to new information and it holds on very strongly to disproven ideas. So the government can, for example, believe that nuclear weapons will continue to spread like a virus, despite the fact that it's consistently overpredicted the spread of nuclear weapons, and despite the fact that its own intelligence analyses tell them that most governments and most groups don't want these weapons. The third thing is that the government has a really peculiar way of not doing forward thinking. I thought I knew about not doing forward thinking. I'm pretty good at not doing it. I think this talk shows that. But the government has this thing, has a sort of rule that if you can agree on the first step of a procedure, but you don't agree on the second step, don't argue over the second step. Move forward and get to the second step later. So that's how you can invade Iraq without really deciding whether you're trying to democratize the country or just get rid of Saddam Hussein, because you never argued over the second step. The fourth point is that the government really can't talk about competing interests to its policies, either foreign or domestic. You can't spell out the priorities. I just had 2 minutes left. How can I now have 1 minute? So that means that you can't say that there are alternative considerations. So that means that, for example, the government can promote democratization in the Middle East without ever really acknowledging that the United States will always privilege its security interests above democratization. And that creates a lot of incoherence in the policy. So this policy gap is so-called between places like Harvard, academia, and the government is often much lamented. I think that there are a lot of reasons for it. We could talk about them, but I only have 30 seconds left. But I think that the fundamental reason is that there is a refusal to acknowledge this particular government genius in this sort of Fitzgeraldian sense. Government genius reflects some real considerations, some political and bureaucratic realities and political and bureaucratic politics that are important. And if you want to learn to swim through Jell-O, it's not enough to be right. That's not really all that interesting. You have to move beyond truth and falsity, and you need to connect to existing processes and understand the incentives. So as I've come back to the Brookings Institution now, that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. So, our next speaker is Mark Brazetis, and his most recent book, the novel Julia and Rodrigo, is a finalist for both the Ohioana Award in Fiction and the Forward Review's Book of the Year Award in Multicultural Fiction. Mark wrote his first novel during his senior year at Harvard, and he apologizes to anyone who read it. And triply apologizes to his mother, who read it 3 times.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Zarmek, Jordan, and Caroline. I'm trying to scout out the seat that I slept in this lecture hall. For my writing career, I'd like to thank my time at the Harvard Crimson, where I didn't learn how to write fiction, I swear, but I did learn how to write fast. And this talk, How to Write a Novel in 100 Days, is inspired by my Peace Corps friend John Coyne, a writer who has a book by the same title, and I did talk to him ahead of time about stealing his title, so it's all good. So the problem in writing a novel, I'll argue, is not one of time, as in where do I find the time, but in conception. How do I approach writing such a complex, multifaceted work of art? And I'm not talking about War and Peace, and I'm not even talking about a shorter novel like Joyce Carol Oates' Black Water, which, knowing her, she probably wrote in an afternoon. I'm talking more about a 200 to 300 page novel. So that's what we're aiming for in this conversation. And my latest novel is 222 pages, so conveniently it fits into that structure. What do you mostly need when you're writing a novel? You need a conflict, which can be defined, I think, easily as what your protagonist wants, doesn't have, wants to get, tries to get. And the more concrete that desire, the more your readers can sense it as tangible, they can feel it, the better off you'll be. So it's not the pursuit of justice, it's something more concrete. How can I get that chocolate covered strawberry on top of the refrigerator when I'm a kid who's only 5 years old? So it's very concrete, right? It's that strawberry is a very concrete object. One of the oldest stories in the world has the simplest of conflicts. The protagonist wants something. What does he want? He wants to go home. Who is this? Yes, good, excellent. This is Odysseus, right? He just wants to go home. And if he were Agamemnon, he'd find smooth sailing, get home, and then get killed by his wife. Don't get any ideas, sweetie. End of story, sort of, with Agamemnon. But, of course, Odysseus runs into a little difficulty getting home. And one element or one difficulty is the Cyclops, right? But there are other difficulties. So the Cyclops represents one challenge, one chapter, one thing to overcome. This is a chapter in the novel of the Odyssey. And I think Homer, in fact, went to his 25th reunion and had a little lecture called How to Write an Epic Poem in 100 Days or something. But there are other obstacles that Odysseus faces, including the Cyclopes, the Sirens, Calypso. So these are all chapters, all obstacles to overcome toward completing the novel, toward completing his journey home. But is a novel over when he gets home, or is this epic poem over when he gets home? Once you have your reader's attention, you want to milk that. You want to hold on to that tension that your story is creating, and if possible, you want to up the ante, which Homer, bless him, does up the ante. Odysseus gets home, but it's not like Penelope's waiting there with open arms, right? There's the final challenge to overcome, which is the fact that she's surrounded by 100 armed men who want to jump into her bed. And Odysseus has only his son. Unfortunately, his dog has died as he just arrived, so he doesn't even have his dog with him. It's just Odysseus and his son who have to overcome the 100 suitors to reunite with Penelope. And of course, he succeeds in sending them off to prison for lifetime sentences. No, he kills them all. But is that the end of the story? Homer milks it a little more because suddenly you have two people who haven't seen each other in 10 years who are husband and wife and have to figure out, do we still like each other? In Homer's version, of course, the gods sprinkle a little dust on them, and not only do they like each other, but they get to return to who they were when they were 20 years old and make mad, passionate music and love. That's a little unrealistic, perhaps, for today's novel, but I do like this idea that there's something more even after the end is there. Those are we define those as the consequences. Back to my book. Of course, James Joyce stole the plot for Ulysses from the Odyssey, so being a thief, I stole the plot of Romeo and Juliet for my novel, except I set it in Guatemala during the Civil War. I was a Peace Corps volunteer during the Guatemalan Civil War. And what do my protagonists want and don't have? Well, of course, like Romeo and Juliet, they just want to be together and live happily ever after. What are the obstacles in each chapter that, or in the conception of the novel, that they have to overcome? There's a class issue. She's rich, he's poor. There's race. He's indigenous, she's Latina. There's religion. She's evangelical, he's Catholic. There's her family. Her father's very against this marriage until Rodrigo starts to show amazing success as a soccer player, which seems to alleviate all those difficulties, but then the Guatemalan Civil War intrudes for that final major conflict in the work. So very schematic in a way, but also very organic to the kind of story I wanted to tell. So again, each chapter represents your protagonist's effort to overcome an obstacle. That's an easy way of plotting your chapters. Think about 12 obstacles, and you've got a 12-chapter book. So you solve one obstacle, your protagonist overcomes one obstacle, and then moves on. What should the design of each chapter be? You might keep this in mind. Readers love action. They like to see their characters do something, even if it's just a conversation in a coffee shop. It doesn't have to be poking out the Cyclops' eyes, but they like to see their characters doing something. So be sure to include an action, preferably to begin each chapter with some kind of action that engages your reader. You want to fill them in a little bit about who they are, what the situation is, background, be as efficient as possible. Each chapter in your novel should have a conflict. In the Odyssey, Odysseus had to overcome a single obstacle, or sometimes a double obstacle, in each chapter to move on to the next stage in his voyage. The effort to overcome that obstacle is the development of your book, or the development of each chapter. It's the attempt to overcome each obstacle. Don't answer all the questions immediately. Remember, all great books are mysteries. You want to keep mysteries alive, the mystery alive for your readers. We don't know whether Odysseus will make it home. We don't know how Penelope will react once he does. A quick note on character development. Be true to yourself or your understanding of yourself when you think about the characters you're writing. This is maybe a more than 100-day journey about being truly honest with who we are, or who I am as a human being, my own faults, my own desires, my own internal conflicts. So a real self-study helps as you think about building characters. But as long as you're honest with your understanding of who human beings are, you can build three-dimensional characters. Here's the quick math on how to write a novel in 100 days. Don't check it because I'm not sure it's correct. But you can see if you don't take a weekend off, if you write 893 words a day, which is less than 5 double-spaced pages, you can knock off a 300-page novel in 12 weeks, which gives you 16 days for revision. And you might say, hey, Mark, it's been 25 years since we graduated. Why haven't you written 75 novels by now? Because I spent 15 years piddling around with poetry, that's why. But there's time. We'll see you at the 35th, and I expect all great novels from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. You single-handedly explained to me why I always skip the whaling chapters in Moby Dick. There's no action, nothing's happening. Okay, our next speaker is Rachel Halenga. Rachel has developed interactive exhibits ranging from a programmable Mr. Potato Head to a 3-story tornado.
You're getting a preview. That was my portfolio, in case you're wondering, but we're going to try and go back to the beginning. Is that for me?
It's the clicker if you want to control your slides.
Sure. Thanks. Wait, so I have this mic. Is that one off? Is that mic off? No, you can use it. Okay, terrific. All right. I want to ask all of you, as my classmates, to help me bridge a big gap. I'm trying to make a very big leap from a 25-year career in museums, connecting girls and boys and everyone to science and technology, to the world of high-tech startups, manufacturing my own printed circuit boards with LEDs and marketing them. And so I'm asking you today not to, to expand, I heard that phrase yesterday, to expand your identity to include not only yourselves as my classmates and perhaps as parents of a daughter between 8 and 12 years of age, maybe an aunt or uncle, but also today, I want you to listen in the role of steely-eyed investors, listening to a product pitch, looking for monetary opportunities and possible pitfalls. So, I am going to be doing a product pitch as part of an application to a startup accelerator in Chicago in June. So, if you would open up your email on your smartphones, key in my email address, then at the end, I would really appreciate it if you heard a phrase that resonated with you, just literally a phrase, and you said, she should keep that in there. You email it to me. And that'll help me know what mattered and what resonated with this group. So I'm on a mission to shift girls and women from consuming technology to making and controlling technology. And I'm going to do that by forging unlikely connections. I want to tell you a quick story. Just last summer, as I had already sort of transitioned from museum work to doing more consulting, but still education, libraries, girls, programs, park districts, I was just leafing through the program guide for the Elmhurst Park District in Elmhurst, Illinois, and I spotted the 2 programs aimed at 4 to 8-year-olds. There was tell fairy tales and go to a fancy tea house for tea, dress up and go to downtown Chicago to the American Doll store and bring home a tiara. And the other program was be a mad scientist, build rockets, learn about robots, and so on. I just sat there and I thought, this was 2013. How could this be? I mean, the image of that rocket in that program, I just thought for a moment, You just tilt a rocket a few degrees, and then with no course corrections, and most rockets are off course almost the entire time, and they do have lots of course corrections, but without any course corrections, without any intervention, the rockets are going to end up on Venus and Mars. And we've started that with children who are age 4 and 8 today, even with all we know, with all the research that was already in place when I was studying psychology here at Harvard. We're still doing that. So I want to actually bring you to a creativity questionnaire. It's not the same content, but it's modeled exactly on a test that I administered as a research assistant for Dr. Ellen Langer, one of my psychology professors. So I want you to look at the 2 columns and just mentally draw a line between any words on the left where you see a connection to any words on the right. And just think about it for a minute. And then kind of count them up. Just how many words on the left could you find some connection really to anything on the right? So I administered this test many times, and I was surprised to find that the only metric was how many lines. That was how we measured creativity. It didn't matter which things you were looking at. The more lines you connected between 2 columns of words, sky on one end, red on the other, and blue, you might obviously connect blue, but skies can be red, right? So that was it. So I'm here today. What I'm going to do in exchange for asking you for your help on my pitch is to boost your creativity. So we are going to draw some connections here. So I wanted to just point out that in 1985, I've got a little statistics for you. If we were sitting in a computer science class in college in 1985, 37 out of 100 students would be women. Now it's 12 out of 100. I, as a psychology major, can tell you I studied statistics. 12 is less than 33% of 37. So that's a 60-something% drop. So what I'm aiming to do is to reverse that trend. I believe we need to shift more girls and women away from just consuming technology. They appear to be equal. They've all got the same number of smartphones as the boys. They're downloading their apps, but they're consuming. And then the boys end up on a different trajectory where they start making things with technology. They make the robots, and they're controlling technology. So by that I mean programming, right? So we're talking about engineering or making technology, or coding and computer science when you're controlling it. So for 25 years, I've been bridging gaps between these diverse audiences who come in, who you can't even count on all of them having the same prior knowledge. They're not even all the same age. They're not the same gender. They're not the same race. And there's gaps between them, and then there's gaps between what they know and what I want them to learn. Starting with my very first job at the Computer Museum, doing an exhibit about history of computers, all the way through increasing the participation of girls in a building exhibit from 50% up to match the boys at 71%, without losing any of the boys, by adding things like fabric. It didn't have to be pink, but just fabric. Girls know fabric is part of their domain, right? And and here perhaps a culmination was the $30 million project with a 3-story tornado and all of this glamour. And you know what? I wasn't satisfied with that. I'm more satisfied. For me, the end product as a psychologist is not the physical thing, it's the interaction between the person and the thing. So, unlikely connections. I'm going to speed us through a couple. My journey really towards this started about 18 months ago, Halloween, at a makerspace where you can pay $30 a month. They're popping all over, shared tools, shared 3D printers, et cetera. But it's the shared access to expertise and the unlikely connections. So I'm there saying, I want to make a Halloween candy dish where there's a motor hidden under that Reese's cup and a shaft inside the Milk Duds. I want the Milk Duds to flip back and forth and say, pick me, when I just startle the kids at Halloween. Here's a haunted dollhouse. It's a programmable dollhouse. If we could just turn our eyes away from robots for a moment and think about girls, they could be programming dollhouses. So I entered the world really of professional makers. This is Massimo Bonzi. I got him to sign my dollhouse because it has an Arduino in it, which is a new device that you can use for this sort of connection. Here I am on Chinese television looking at that as a maker. So I'm just talking about unlikely connections there, duct tape bracelets and LEDs. So pop quiz. How we doing? Anyone doing any better there on their quiz? Here are some of the things we talked about. And so I started, actually, I took what I was experiencing out in these sort of education settings, and I started making these. I'm going to back up to that. I started an e-commerce site, and then I started hearing back from adult women who this was their first entry point. So much has happened. So this product is a $1 LED on a printed circuit board with the resistor, which means you can just add it to a battery with conductive tape, with conductive Velcro, with conductive thread. You can sew it. I've got tape now punched to fit onto Legos. And so you can connect it to almost anything, which is what I love to do, because I'm trying to get these girls and women to make technology, to program it, to control it, and I want to achieve that by forging these unlikely connections. And I'm starting with any new unlikely connections I might make today with you in this audience.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Ellen Harvey. Despite not having majored in VES while at Harvard, Ellen Harvey has gone on to have a fairly serious art career. She was included in the 2008 Whitney Biennial and has exhibited extensively in the US and internationally at such venues as the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the Bass Museum in Miami Beach, Florida, the Center for Contemporary Art, Warsaw, SMAK in Ghent, Belgium, the Pennsylvania Academy of Art in Philadelphia, the Turner Contemporary in Margate, UK, you know what, so many places. And her book, The New York Beautification Project, was published by Gregory R. Miller and Company in 2005, which will be publishing a new monograph of her work next year. According to Ellen, her talk, which she originally titled Why Art Matters, should more truthfully be titled Why Art Matters to Me, or perhaps even more truthfully, how I became a failure-obsessed criminal despite a quite promising start.
Well, this is not intimidating at all. I want to start by talking about one project that happened about 15 years ago when I was asked to do an art project in Highbridge Park. For those of you who don't live in New York, and probably for many of you who do, Highbridge Park was a park that was along, it's about 181st Street is the entrance. It's on the east side of Manhattan. And it was the kind of park where, cars went to be stripped. Or when they, basically, when they renovated it, they found a bag with a torso in it. It was that sort of bag. So even when the park looked all spiffy and fantastic, the park had a problem, which is that nobody wanted to go into this park for understandable reasons. So in their sort of genius, the New York Restoration Society, which had restored the park fantastically, decided to have a series of events. And in a moment of misguided non-genius, they decided to have an art event. This involved asking a whole bunch of artists to basically make art projects with the thought that this would lure the sort of neighborhood into the park. I mean, of course, all it did was lure other artists into the park, so none of whom probably ever went back to Highbridge Park. So I'm not quite sure it really worked. But anyway, I was asked, and at the time, I was mainly a painter. So I was mainly in my studio making what I sort of sometimes refer to as wallpaper for rich people. And there I was. I get to the park, and I think, what am I going to do? Am I going to take a painting and just hang it on a tree? But then I thought, no, this is my moment. I can become a public artist. Yes. So I look around, but the only thing I know how to do is paint. But there already is quite a lot of paint. This guy, ARD, as you can see, has already adequately decorated one of the columns on the extremely perilous underpass that you have to go through to get into the park. So I was like, well, I'm going to tag ARD. So I was like, what's my tag as basically the dorkiest person ever? It's like going to be Claude Lorrain. So here we are. So I set off to tag ARD's tag. It turns out it's right next to these sort of jumble of bushes, which seem to be where the sort of lonely hearts of the neighborhood tend to go. There's one man in particular has a very prolonged solo experience, very impressive. I'm working on this. The next day, this teenage boy emerges with his girlfriend from the bushes and says, she says, "So, this is your job?" And I said, "Yes, this is my job." He said, "Man," he said, "how did you get this job?" And I said, "Well, I just started doing it." He said, "How much are they paying you?" And I said, "Nothing." And he's like, "Man, you got to get a better job." So, unfortunately, I did not heed this very sensible advice and decided that I was going to make this into a project. It was going to be called, ridiculously, the New York Beautification Project, and I was going to go around New York painting small landscapes in oil without permission, I guess, which is a polite way of saying illegally, over graffiti sites at a time when, of course, there was a massive Giuliani anti-graffiti crackdown. And I thought, well, yes, so it'd be interesting to see whether, there is actually a consensus. Why are people so against graffiti? I thought, well, maybe it's the aesthetic. If I change the aesthetic, or maybe it's a problem with the medium. I mean, everyone likes oil paint, right? And let's face it, I'm the perfect demographic to become a public career criminal. It doesn't get any better than being a white woman then in my 30s. So I head off. This is in the South Bronx. I met the guy whose brother I tagged, and he was just like, he's like, "You're doing this with respect, right?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And he was like, yeah. He's like, "This is going to go nowhere." He said, "Look, my brother, he's got a .com now. He does this all over the city." He said, "This is too small. You can't even see it from a car. And where's your crew?" Then I kept going. So I kept on doing these all over the city. This is a guy with a little pillow shop who was very concerned about its longevity. I had a lot of interesting experiences, which is why I ended up writing the book about it. And I have to say, this is some graffiti for Al Gore. Check that out. That's a real classic. How often do you get to see that? That's a beautiful moment. This is actually near my gallery, which I was working with in Chelsea at the time, who were in a state of despair because I'd stopped doing anything from their perspective that was useful or productive, or more importantly, sellable. So I go along this, and my theory is that you can create a kind of public consensus. And so New York is actually great for this, because people bring you sandwiches, a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands on the street, and so I met to meet a lot of people who hang out on street corners, and obviously also the kind of street corners where you could break the law in public for several hours a day, for several days. So smelly street corners in general. But of course, I did in the end get caught. Normally, I had this great sort of trick where I'd wear a bright orange jacket. Whenever the police went by, I would just wave enthusiastically at them, which just worked really well. Until, of course, one day when I guess I was in the meatpacking district, which was still the meatpacking district, and they bumped me against a wall, and suddenly there's New York's finest saying, what's this? What are you doing? Do you have permission? And I was like, I've met all the meatpacking workers. They go in, they come out, and this is great Kafkaesque moment where they say, "Ellen, this is, you can't have permission because the owner is dead." This is, of course, a complete no-win situation. And they start saying, "Well, the mayor hates graffiti. We're taking you down." And then finally one of them looks at us, and they've already banged me into the wall a bit before just to sort of, make me realize how lucky I am, and how they treat the homeless, which was what they explained they thought I originally was. And they decided to let me go. And all I could think at the time was my poor parents. They sent me to Harvard. I went went to Yale Law School. I quit being a lawyer. I'm going to jail. But it's also the moment when I started to realize why I care about art, which is that art is a moment which is really all about that desire for something extraordinary, that desire for something that we all have in our lives, where you want to make a difference, no matter how ludicrous your attempt is, no matter how pathetic. And every artwork is haunted by the ghost of an artwork that would have been better, that could have been better. And so that's what I've really devoted the rest of my life to doing, which is to go around making crazy things that hopefully seduce people into thinking and often embarrass the hell out of me. So this is the New York Beautification Project. This is me graffitiing the secession in Vienna, where I did get arrested, despite having permission. Despite having permission. This is the Pennsylvania Academy, recreated as a ruin, a carpet for commuters. The Yankee Stadium with the home of the stars, with real stars in mosaic. This is a museum for failure. And here we have the Turner Contemporaries, which is Turner's gallery, we created as a fun ground. A nudist museum with a gift shop. You've got to have the gift shop. And this here is the Internal Revenue Service as a ruin, reforested. This is it installed as a mirror in the Internal Revenue Service. And who said they didn't have a sense of humor? And these are their fossils for their thing. And the last one is imagining Washington, D.C., as if we'd all disappeared, we're all gone, and aliens come to visit us. Thank you so much.
We have one final speaker. It's Jeff Camp. For the last 13 years since leaving Microsoft, Jeff has been working for education change in his home state of California. As an appointee to the Governor's Committee on Education Excellence, he helped set the stage for some of the major changes in education finance that are happening right now. This morning at Memorial Church, he writes, "We remembered the classmates that have passed on. Jeff came close to being among them. The topic of his 7-minute stretch is how to survive brain surgery and still change the world."
So, about 6 years ago, I woke up in the morning after a terrible night's sleep, and I felt very disoriented, and my head hurt something horrible. I was so disoriented. I'd been burning the candle at both ends. I mean, I was really tired. That had to be it, right? But of course, it really wasn't. I'm going to talk about surviving brain surgery, but let's face it, I don't really know how to do that. And all of you know how to change the world, so we'll dispense with that part. But nevertheless, I'm going to at least talk about the experience that I had, because I do think there are maybe a few things that you could draw some value out of. I had been working really hard on something that I care a lot about, which is education change. I was serving on a governor-appointed committee, coming up with a plan, and it was a great plan, and I was really excited about it, and I really, really wanted to keep doing that and not think about the fact that I was having a headache, and I never get headaches. So after about 2 days of headache, my wife said, "You must at least call the doctor," which I did because I listened to my wife. And unfortunately, the doctor called me right back and said, "You don't get headaches. Are you busy this week?" I said, "Yeah, actually, I'm working on this report, and it's a really big thing. I'm very excited about it." And she said, "Yeah, well, tomorrow, you're not doing any of those things. You have a job. You are going to call these people." And she's read me these names over the phone and gave me the phone numbers and basically said, "This is what's going to happen tomorrow. It's not what you thought. It's going to be this." So I got in touch with these doctors, and I ended up going and getting an MRI because I was told that that was what I had to do. And the MRI showed a shadow right here on my left parietal lobe. And the neurologist, who was the first available neurologist, said, it looks like you've probably had a stroke, and you should start taking aspirin because it'll thin your blood, which I said, okay, I can take aspirin. I'll take an aspirin. And as I started feeling better, I got back to work, and I didn't really think anything about it. But then there was a follow-up a month later, because that was part of the plan, to take a look at the image then and the image a month later, because if it had been a stroke, you see, there would have been healing. But the image was exactly the same. So it wasn't actually a stroke. It was a brain tumor. So I got to work, because that's what we do. I got online and I started searching for information about brain tumors because, you know, I'm a Harvard guy. I'm going to learn about this, and I'm going to do-it-yourself brain surgery or something like that. I don't know what I was thinking. But I bet there's a brain surgeon in here somewhere. So look, you know, obviously you go online and there's something that's terrible news like this, and you start looking at it, and you don't really know what you're looking at, but you find graphs like this that say, at the time, my kids were 4, 6, and 8 years old. And I imagine that you can imagine how unsettling it would be to think about this. I mean, there was a real chance that they were going to have to grow up without me. Or equally unsettling, maybe with a diminished version of me. And I was really, really scared by this. I was scared and sad and frightened and basically falling apart. I could not look at my kids without just losing it. I didn't know what the reality was. I didn't know what I would have to go through. I knew it would take some time. And I couldn't look at my kids. I would just fall apart. Luckily, I had some friends. And they'd been involved in a counseling program, a kind of a peer counseling program. And so I called them up and said, I've had this thing happen. And they said, oh, well, we were busy for tomorrow, but we're not really busy for tomorrow anymore. We're going to come and talk with you. And I think of this as Operation Sour Squeeze. They did something that I had absolutely no idea as a kind of a self-controlled guy. They got me to cry. I'm a terrible crier. I'm just not good at it. I want to, reason my way out of things or, solve the problem. And what they did was they got me to think about everything terrible that I could be afraid or sad or resentful or angry about, and just express it in words because I'm a talker. And I cried, and I cried, and I cried. And you know what? Afterward, I could face my kids. It was weird. I was used up. I was wrung out. Of course, that was still not solving the ultimate problem, which was that something really big had to happen. And there's a hole in there. You might be able to spot it. I don't know. So the next order of business, of course, is to get it taken care of, and you don't just want anybody making a hole in your head. So I figured I wanted to find a really great surgeon. That turns out to be kind of a hard problem if you don't know anything about something that's really specialized. So how do you do that? How do you figure out who you want? And this is where I think hopefully I may be giving you some help or information that might be useful to you. There is somebody who knows, without a doubt, who the great surgeon is that you want. It's the nurses. If you get into a situation where you or somebody that you love needs a special kind of care, ask around to find out who the nurses are that work on the specialty and chat them up, because not only do they know who is great, but they can also get you in, which turns out not to be that easy. So my surgery was done at UCSF by Dr. Mitch Berger, who is a Harvard grad, and I think he did a nice job. What do you think? It was an anaplastic astrocytoma, for those of you keeping notes on this sort of thing, or who know about this sort of thing. And it was about the size of a small mandarin orange, so not as big as the tangerine that you see there. But anyway, it was an object. Getting an object taken out of your head drains your head, and it feels like you've been rebooted. This is the morbid curiosity part of the speech. Okay, everything that I know how to do, I had to rediscover whether I could still do it. It turned out that I could. I could still speak. I could still see, although I'm a little vague on this area, this quadrant down here. But that's okay. I can't see back here either, or up here, and I still have a view of the world. Anyway, I had to kind of rebuild these capabilities and my confidence in them. And, let's be honest, there are a few things that got chipped away. And if they didn't get chipped away there, because it was an anaplastic astrocytoma, it needed to have a little extra treatment with some chemotherapy and some radiation, which stinks, by the way. But, you get through it. I've spent my whole life improving. And then something like this happens, and pops you down. And I really disliked that a lot. And so I started thinking about ways to move off of the single line path. And I realized that I had not, I really love music and had enjoyed that a lot in my youth, but I had been so busy that I just hadn't picked up my guitar in a long time. So I decided, okay, I'm going to pick up my guitar. And I got to say, this was a really great choice. And I had written bits of songs, but I never finished them. And so I started finishing songs. So anyway, inevitably, the first song was Evil Tangerine, which is a rock and roll song. I did sing it I tried to sing it yesterday at the open mic. Anyway, a few takeaways from all of this. One is that denial's bad. I'm very lucky that there were 2 people that insisted that I go to the doctor and get the MRI. And if you're not that person for somebody else, maybe you should think about playing that role for them. And if you don't have somebody in your life who plays that role for you, it's probably not a good plan. You need somebody like that. The second thing is that, at least for me, crying is like puking. I hate it, and after I did it, I felt a lot better, so you might consider it. The third is that nurses are your secret agents. You now know how to get to the person you need. And then the last is try new things too. That if things are hard, just working to get them back is, I guess, it's important, but, there may be other things that you can do that you'll love and that are different and that make you a bigger, more whole person. Thank you.
All right. I know everyone, the lunch starts in 10 minutes. I think the incredible work that everyone put into their talks, thank you so much. And we have a few minutes if people would like to make any comments or questions. This is being taped, just so you know. So we have some mics. Does anyone want to, any comments or questions for the speakers? Everyone's like, okay, I gotta get my lunch. Okay. Shut up. I gotta get the niçoise salad. No. All right, everyone good?